May 7th, 1944, 3,000 feet above the Belgian countryside, Lieutenant Herman Ernst banked his Messerschmitt BF 110 night fighter through the darkness, his eyes scanning instruments that glowed faintly green in the cramped cockpit. Behind him, radar operator Feldwebel Klaus Richter hunched over the Lichtenstein BC radar scope, watching for the distinctive blips that would indicate British bombers returning from raids over the Ruhr Valley. The Luftwaffe's night fighter force had achieved devastating success throughout 1943 and early 1944. German crews flying the Bf 110 and the newer Junkers Ju-88 had developed tactics that turned the night sky over occupied Europe into a hunting ground where Allied bombers fell in numbers that threatened the entire strategic bombing campaign. Ernst himself had claimed 11 confirmed kills, each one marked by a small silhouette painted beneath his cockpit canopy. The Lichtenstein radar gave German night fighters a decisive technological advantage. The system could detect bomber formations from distances exceeding 2 miles, providing enough warning for pilots to position themselves for optimal attack angles. British bombers flying at night had believed darkness would protect them from interception. The reality was that German radar operators could track individual aircraft with precision that made evasive maneuvers nearly useless. Ernst maintained his patrol altitude as Richter called out a contact bearing 040 degrees, range approximately 4,000 meters. The lieutenant adjusted his heading, advancing throttles to increase his closure rate. Standard intercept procedure required approaching from below and behind, where the bomber's defensive guns had limited fields of fire. The Messerschmitt carried 4 20mm cannons and 2 7.92mm machine guns, enough firepower to destroy a Lancaster or Halifax, with a single sustained burst. But something was different about tonight's contact. Richter's voice carried an edge of confusion as he reported the target's behavior. The aircraft was flying lower than typical bomber altitudes, moving at speeds that seemed inconsistent with heavily loaded British heavy bombers. The radar signature was unusual, showing a return pattern that Richter had not encountered in 18 months of night operations. Ernst closed to visual range and found himself staring at an aircraft configuration he did not recognize. Twin booms extending rearward from the wings, a central nacelle that appeared to house the crew. The silhouette was wrong for any Allied bomber in the intelligence briefings he had studied. This was something new, something the Luftwaffe had not prepared them to face. The American aircraft turned sharply, demonstrating maneuverability that no heavy bomber could match. Ernst attempted to follow, but his Messerschmitt could not match the tight, turning radius the unknown aircraft achieved. More disturbing, the American pilot seemed to know exactly where Ernst was flying despite the complete darkness. No moon illuminated the sky. Cloud cover blocked any ambient light. Yet the American aircraft maneuvered as though it could see the Messerschmitt clearly. Richter shouted a warning as his radar scope showed another contact approaching rapidly from their 6 o'clock position. Ernst threw the Bf 110 into a diving turn, but cannon fire traced past his right wing. Explosive rounds detonated close enough that he could hear them over the engine noise. The Messerschmitt shuddered as several hits connected with the fuselage. Ernst pushed his aircraft into a steeper dive, using altitude to build speed for escape. Behind him, the American aircraft followed with precision that defied everything German intelligence had assessed about Allied night fighting capabilities. The Americans had brought operational radar-equipped night fighters to the European theatre, aircraft that could hunt German fighters the same way the Luftwaffe had been hunting Allied bombers. The technological advantage that had made German night fighter crews feel invincible was about to become their greatest vulnerability. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. Lieutenant Eugene Axtell pushed the control yoke of his P-61 Black Widow forward, following the diving Messerschmitt through the darkness over Belgium. In the seat behind him, radar operator Lieutenant Edward Kopsel kept his eyes locked on the SCR 720 radar scope, calling out range and bearing corrections as the German fighter attempted to escape. The Black Widow's twin Pratt and Whitney R 2800 engines produced 2,800 horsepower, giving Axtell the speed he needed to close the distance. The P-61 represented the United States Army Air Force's first purpose-built night fighter, designed specifically to hunt enemy aircraft in complete darkness. Northrop Corporation had begun development in 1940, responding to British requests for an aircraft that could counter Luftwaffe night bombing raids. The resulting design incorporated radar, heavy armament, and performance characteristics that would allow it to dominate the night sky in ways that converted day fighters never could. Axtell had arrived in England 3 months earlier as part of the 422nd Night Fighter Squadron, the first American unit equipped with the Black Widow. The crews had trained extensively in the United States, learning to coordinate between pilot, radar operator, and gunner in conditions where visual references were non-existent. Night fighting required different skills than daylight combat. Pilots needed to trust their instruments completely. Radar operators needed to interpret scope returns and translating them into intercept vectors. The entire crew needed to function as a single unit where communication failures meant death. The SCR-720 radar mounted in the Black Widow's nose represented American electronic warfare technology at its most advanced development stage. The system operated at a frequency of 205 MHz, providing detection ranges that exceeded 5 miles under optimal conditions. The radar operator could track multiple targets simultaneously, selecting priority threats and guiding the pilot through complex intercept geometries that would be impossible using visual references alone. German intelligence assessments had underestimated American night fighter capabilities throughout 1943. Luftwaffe commanders believed the Americans lacked the technical expertise and operational experience necessary to challenge German air superiority during night operations. The BF-110 and Ju-88 had established dominance through superior radar, experienced crews, and tactics refined through thousands of combat missions. American entry into European night operations was viewed as an inevitable failure by pilots who had destroyed hundreds of RAF bombers. Copsell called out that the Messerschmitt had leveled off at 1,000 feet, attempting to use terrain masking to break radar contact. Axtell adjusted his altitude, maintaining pursuit while his gunner, Sergeant Robert Flynn, charged the 4 20mm cannons mounted in the Black Widow's belly. The aircraft carried 600 rounds of ammunition, enough for sustained engagement against multiple targets. Unlike German night fighters that relied on upward-firing cannons designed for attacks against bombers, the P-61 was built to engage enemy fighters in conventional air combat. The German pilot was skilled, executing evasive maneuvers that would have defeated less capable pursuers. But Axtell had the advantage of real-time radar guidance that showed him exactly where the Messerschmitt was going before the German pilot completed each maneuver. The SCR-720 provided range, bearing, and altitude data that eliminated the guesswork from night interception. Axtell could position his aircraft for optimal firing solutions while the German pilot was flying blind, unable to see his pursuer or anticipate the attack. The engagement lasted 4 minutes before Axtell achieved firing position. The Black Widow's cannons fired in devastating sequence, sending 20mm explosive rounds into the Messerschmitt's right engine and cockpit. The German aircraft rolled inverted and entered an uncontrolled dive. Axtell pulled up to avoid the descending fighter, watching as it impacted the Belgian countryside in a fireball that briefly illuminated the ground below. Copsell marked the kill coordinates and noted the time of engagement for the post-mission report. This was the 422nd Squadron's 15th confirmed victory since arriving in the European theatre. The unit was establishing a reputation for effectiveness that contradicted every German assumption about American night fighting capabilities. Luftwaffe crews who had felt invulnerable while hunting Allied bombers were now being hunted by aircraft they could not see and could not escape. The P-61 had earned its name through appearance as much as capabilities. The aircraft's matte black paint scheme made it nearly invisible against the night sky. The twin-boom configuration created a distinctive silhouette that German pilots learned to recognize with a fear they had never felt toward RAF night fighters. The Black Widow was fast enough to chase down German bombers, maneuverable enough to dogfight with enemy fighters, and equipped with radar sophisticated enough to find targets in conditions where human vision was useless. Colonel Winston Kratz commanded the 422nd Night Fighter Squadron from a headquarters building at Scorton Airfield in northern England. He reviewed the mission reports from the previous night's operations, noting patterns that indicated German night fighter tactics were beginning to change. Luftwaffe crews were becoming more cautious, breaking off engagements earlier when they detected radar contact from unidentified aircraft. The psychological impact of the Black Widow was affecting German operational effectiveness even when no combat occurred. The strategic implications extended beyond individual engagements. German night fighters had been the primary threat to Allied strategic bombing operations throughout 1943. RAF Bomber Command had lost thousands of aircraft to Luftwaffe night fighters equipped with radar and experienced crews. The introduction of effective American night fighters threatened to neutralize German defensive advantages and allow Allied bombers to operate with reduced casualties. Kratz understood that the Black Widow's success depended on more than technical specifications. Crew training was crucial. Night operations required coordination and situational awareness that exceeded anything demanded in daylight combat. Pilots needed to fly on instruments while processing radar operator instructions and monitoring tactical communications. Radar operators needed to distinguish between friendly and enemy contacts while tracking multiple targets. Gunners needed to maintain weapons systems and provide backup observations when radar contact was ambiguous. The 422nd Squadron had developed training protocols that emphasized crew integration. Pilots and radar operators flew together repeatedly until they developed almost telepathic communication efficiency. The relationship between pilot and radar operator determined mission success more than individual skill levels. A mediocre pilot with an excellent radar operator could achieve better results than an ace pilot working with an inexperienced electronics specialist. Lieutenant Axtel's success stemmed from his partnership with Kopsel, who had demonstrated exceptional ability to interpret radar returns and calculate intercept vectors. The two had trained together at Orlando Army Air Base in Florida, flying hundreds of practice missions before deploying to England. Their communication during combat was minimal and precise, with Kopsel providing only essential information while Axtel executed maneuvers based on implicit understanding of tactical geometry. The Black Widow's radar system required constant maintenance and calibration. Ground crews worked through the night to ensure each aircraft's SCR-720 was functioning at peak performance before missions. Vacuum tubes needed replacement. Antenna systems required alignment checks. Signal processors needed calibration against known test targets. A single malfunctioning component could render the entire radar useless, transforming the night fighter into an expensive blind aircraft unable to locate targets in darkness. Technical Sergeant James Morrison supervised radar maintenance for the squadron, managing a team of specialists who understood the complex electronics that made the Black Widow effective. Morrison had worked with radar systems since 1941, when the technology was new enough that most technicians were learning through trial and error. His expertise was crucial to maintaining operational readiness rates that allowed the squadron to fly multiple missions each night. The P-61 carried enough fuel for 4 hours of patrol operations, giving crews sufficient endurance to intercept multiple targets during extended missions. The aircraft's range exceeded that of most German night fighters, allowing American crews to penetrate deeper into occupied territory while maintaining fuel reserves for combat and return flight. This operational flexibility meant Black Widow squadrons could establish patrol patterns that covered critical areas where German night fighters typically gathered to intercept Allied bombers. German responses to the Black Widow threat evolved slowly. Luftwaffe intelligence struggled to assess American night fighter capabilities because so few German crews survived encounters to provide detailed reports. The aircraft that returned to base carried damage that indicated heavy cannon armament and radar-directed attacks, but German commanders initially attributed these losses to RAF night fighters rather than recognizing a new threat from American units. Oberst Heinrich Prinz zu Wittgenstein commanded a Luftwaffe night fighter wing based at Wittmundhafen in northern Germany. His unit operated Ju-88 night fighters, equipped with Lichtenstein radar and upward-firing cannons. Wittgenstein had accumulated 83 confirmed kills against RAF bombers, making him one of Germany's most successful night fighter pilots. He reviewed intelligence reports describing encounters with unknown Allied aircraft that possessed radar capabilities superior to anything previously encountered. The reports troubled Wittgenstein because they indicated a fundamental shift in the tactical situation. German night fighters had operated with the assumption that they were the hunters, while Allied bombers were prey. If American aircraft could hunt German fighters with the same radar advantages that had made the Luftwaffe so effective, the entire strategic calculation would change. German crews would need to develop new tactics while operating under the psychological burden of knowing they could be attacked at any moment by an enemy they could not see. Luftwaffe training programs had not prepared pilots for defensive night operations. German crews had learned to intercept bombers using radar guidance from ground controllers, who could see the entire tactical picture on their scopes. Individual aircraft radar systems were used for final approach and weapons delivery, but the broader situational awareness came from ground-based installations. American night fighters operated independently, using onboard radar to detect, track, and engage targets without ground controller assistance. This operational independence gave Black Widow crews tactical flexibility that German fighters lacked. Axtell could pursue targets of opportunity without waiting for ground controller authorization. Kopsel could switch between multiple contacts based on threat assessment and tactical priorities. The P-61 functioned as a self-contained hunting system that could adapt to changing situations faster than German crews constrained by centralized control procedures. The psychological impact on German crews was profound. Night fighter pilots who had felt invincible while stalking Allied bombers now flew with the awareness that they could become targets at any moment. The darkness that had protected them from visual detection no longer provided security against American radar. Every mission carried the possibility of encountering a Black Widow, and German crews had no effective countermeasures beyond attempting to escape when they detected unusual radar contacts. Wittgenstein ordered his pilots to break off engagements immediately if they observed aircraft performing maneuvers inconsistent with bomber characteristics. The directive acknowledged that German crews could not effectively fight against American night fighters equipped with superior radar and comparable performance. This defensive posture represented a significant degradation in Luftwaffe operational effectiveness, as German night fighters abandoned their primary mission to avoid combat with American interceptors. The strategic consequences extended throughout the European air campaign. Allied bomber losses to German night fighters declined as Luftwaffe crews became more cautious about pursuing targets. The Black Widow's presence forced German tactical changes that reduced defensive effectiveness without requiring large numbers of American night fighters. A single squadron equipped with 30 aircraft created enough uncertainty to affect German operations across hundreds of miles of airspace. Colonel Kratz received authorization to expand night fighter operations in June 1944, following the successful D-Day landings. The 422nd Squadron would receive additional aircraft and crews, while 2 more squadrons would deploy to forward bases in France. The expansion reflected recognition that American night fighters had achieved strategic impact beyond their relatively small numbers. The psychological advantage created by the Black Widow was as valuable as the physical destruction of enemy aircraft. Lieutenant Axtell flew his 19th mission on the night of June 23rd, patrolling over recently captured territory near Carentan. Kopsel detected multiple contacts that German ground controllers were attempting to direct against Allied transport aircraft supplying forward units. The Black Widow's intercept capability allowed Axtell to engage German night fighters before they reached their intended targets, effectively reversing the tactical roles that had characterized air operations throughout the war. The engagement ended with 2 confirmed kills and 1 probable. Axtell's Black Widow had protected Allied transport operations while destroying German aircraft that represented thousands of hours of training and irreplaceable combat experience. The mission exemplified how American night fighters were shifting the strategic balance by denying Germany the night operations capability that had been crucial to their defensive strategy. German technical intelligence finally acquired detailed information about the P-61 in July 1944, when a damaged Black Widow made an emergency landing at an airfield that remained partially under German control. Luftwaffe engineers examined the SCR-720 radar system with growing recognition of how thoroughly American technology had surpassed their own capabilities. The radar's frequency, range, and resolution exceeded anything Germany had deployed operationally. The aircraft's speed and armament matched or exceeded German night fighter performance. The intelligence report reached Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring's headquarters, with recommendations that German night fighter production priorities be revised to counter the American threat. But Germany's industrial capacity was already stretched beyond sustainable limits in mid-1944. Factories were being bombed regularly. Raw materials were scarce. Skilled workers had been drafted into infantry units to replace catastrophic losses on the Eastern Front. The technical specifications that would be required to match American night fighter capabilities were beyond Germany's ability to manufacture in meaningful quantities. Oberst Wittgenstein read the technical assessment with the grim understanding that his night fighter wing was facing an opponent they could not defeat through tactical innovation alone. The Americans had achieved technological superiority through systematic engineering development and industrial production capacity that Germany simply could not match. The Lichtenstein radar that had seemed so advanced in 1942 was now obsolete compared to American systems that operated at higher frequencies with better resolution and longer range. The production numbers told a story that was even more devastating than the technical specifications. The United States was manufacturing P-61 aircraft at rates that would put hundreds of Black Widows into operational service before the end of 1944. German night fighter production was declining as Allied bombing disrupted manufacturing facilities and supply chains. The strategic balance was shifting irreversibly toward American air superiority in all operational conditions, day and night. Lieutenant Ernst survived his encounter with the Black Widow, landing his damaged Messerschmitt at a forward airfield with hydraulic systems failing and his radar operator wounded by cannon fragments. His mission report described an aircraft that could match or exceed German night fighter performance while hunting with radar capabilities that gave it decisive tactical advantages. Ernst requested reassignment to day fighter operations, unwilling to continue flying missions where he knew American night fighters could detect and engage him without warning. The Luftwaffe's night fighter force, which had been the elite of German aviation, was experiencing morale problems that affected operational readiness throughout the second half of 1944. Pilots who had accumulated dozens of kills against Allied bombers were now reluctant to engage targets that might be defended by Black Widows. The psychological dominance that had characterized German night operations was collapsing as crews realized they were no longer the hunters but had become the hunted. Colonel Kratz visited the forward operating base at Florennes, Belgium in August 1944 to observe flight operations and confer with squadron commanders who were operating in newly liberated territory. The Black Widow squadrons were moving closer to German airspace, expanding their patrol areas to include routes where Luftwaffe night fighters had traditionally operated without challenge. The advance of American night fighter bases meant German crews had less safe airspace for training and fewer options for avoiding combat with superior opponents. The 422nd Squadron had increased its sortie rate to 4 missions per aircraft per week, maintaining continuous pressure on German night operations. Lieutenant Axtell flew his 30th mission on August 15th, intercepting a formation of Ju-88 night fighters that were attempting to attack Allied transport aircraft near the German border. The engagement resulted in 3 confirmed kills and forced the remaining German aircraft to abort their mission without engaging their intended targets. Kopsel's radar technique had evolved through constant practice and combat experience. He could distinguish between different aircraft types based on their radar return characteristics, allowing him to prioritize threats and guide Axtell toward the most dangerous targets first. This tactical discrimination gave the Black Widow crew significant advantages in complex engagement scenarios, where multiple contacts appeared simultaneously on the radar scope. The technical evolution of American night fighter operations continued throughout the summer of 1944, Engineers developed improved radar signal processors that reduced clutter from ground returns, making it easier for operators to detect low-flying aircraft against terrain backgrounds. The enhancements were incorporated into existing SCR-720 systems through field modifications that improved performance without requiring complete equipment replacement. German attempts to develop electronic countermeasures against American radar proved largely ineffective. Luftwaffe technical services experimented with metal chaff and active jamming transmitters, but the SCR-720 operated at frequencies that made it difficult to jam without sophisticated equipment that Germany could not produce in quantity. The few jamming systems that reached operational units were too heavy and power-hungry for practical installation in night fighter aircraft that were already overloaded with radar and weapon systems. The strategic air campaign over Europe entered its final phase in September 1944, with Allied forces advancing across France toward the German border. Black Widow squadrons maintained patrols over supply routes and forward airfields, protecting Allied air operations from German interdiction while continuing to hunt Luftwaffe night fighters wherever they could be found. The combination of defensive protection and offensive hunting established air superiority that extended into night operations where Germany had previously maintained significant capabilities. Wittgenstein's night fighter wing relocated to airfields deeper inside Germany as Allied advances threatened their forward bases. The retreat reduced their operational effectiveness because it increased the distance to patrol areas where they could intercept Allied bombers. German crews were flying longer missions with less time on station, reducing the number of engagements they could conduct before fuel limitations forced them to return to base. The tactical situation was deteriorating in ways that no amount of pilot skill or courage could overcome. Lieutenant Axtell received promotion to captain in October 1944, recognition of his effectiveness as a night fighter pilot and his contribution to the squadron's success. His kill total had reached 13 confirmed victories, making him one of the leading American night fighter aces in the European theater. The designation carried less public recognition than day fighter aces who accumulated higher scores, but military commanders understood that night kills represented greater difficulty and strategic value than many daylight victories. The Black Widow's operational record had validated every aspect of its design philosophy. The aircraft performed exactly as Northrop engineers had intended, providing American forces with night fighting capabilities that matched or exceeded anything their opponents could field. The P-61 had achieved air superiority in the one operational domain where German forces had maintained advantages throughout most of the war, fundamentally altering the strategic balance in ways that affected outcomes far beyond individual aerial engagements. German night fighter losses accelerated throughout the autumn of 1944 as fuel shortages, pilot attrition, and mechanical failures combined to reduce Luftwaffe operational capabilities. The Black Widow contributed to this decline by forcing German crews to operate defensively, avoiding combat when possible and breaking off engagements when they detected American night fighters. The psychological pressure of knowing that superior opponents were hunting them degraded German effectiveness even when no actual combat occurred. The technological gap between American and German night fighting capabilities continued widening as United States industrial production delivered increasingly sophisticated equipment while German manufacturing struggled to maintain output of existing designs. American factories were producing improved radar systems, more powerful engines, and enhanced weapons, while German plants were being relocated underground to escape Allied bombing. The contrast in industrial capacity translated directly into tactical superiority that German crews confronted during every mission. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. Oberst Wittgenstein flew his final mission on the night of January 21st, 1945. His Ju-88 was intercepted by an RAF Mosquito night fighter over northern Germany. The engagement lasted less than 2 minutes before Wittgenstein's aircraft was shot down, killing him and his crew. The loss of Germany's most successful night fighter pilot symbolized the complete collapse of Luftwaffe night operations that had once been the most effective component of German air defenses. The circumstances of Wittgenstein's death illustrated the fundamental transformation that had occurred in night air operations. German crews, who had once hunted Allied bombers with confidence, were now prey for Allied night fighters equipped with superior radar and better aircraft. The technological advantages that had made German night fighters so effective in 1942 and 1943 had been negated by Allied developments that Germany could not match or counter. Captain Axtell continued flying missions through the winter of 1945, though target availability decreased as the Luftwaffe's operational capacity collapsed. German night fighters were increasingly scarce, their sorties limited by fuel shortages and the destruction of airfields that forced remaining units to operate from improvised facilities with minimal support infrastructure. The Black Widow patrols encountered fewer contacts, though each engagement still represented the technological superiority that American forces had established. The strategic bombing campaign that had cost the RAF thousands of aircraft and tens of thousands of aircrew in 1943 was concluding with dramatically reduced casualties in 1945. Allied bombers could operate against German targets with losses measured in single-digit percentages rather than the double-digit casualty rates that had characterized earlier operations. The reduction in losses was attributable to multiple factors, but the neutralization of German night fighter effectiveness was among the most significant. Black Widow squadrons expanded their missions to include ground attack operations as aerial opposition diminished. The P-61's heavy armament made it effective against trains, vehicles, and installations that could be located using radar during night operations. Captain Axtell flew several ground attack missions in February and March 1945, using the Black Widow's radar to identify targets that would be invisible to pilots relying on visual references alone. The final months of the European War demonstrated how completely American night fighters had dominated the operational environment. German forces that had once controlled the night sky were reduced to defensive postures where survival rather than mission. Accomplishment became the primary objective. The psychological impact of this reversal affected German military effectiveness across multiple domains, as the inevitability of defeat became apparent to everyone, from senior commanders to individual aircrew. The 422nd Night Fighter Squadron concluded combat operations in May 1945 with an official record of 43 confirmed aerial victories and numerous ground targets destroyed. The unit's success rate exceeded that of most day fighter squadrons, achieved against opponents who were considered among the most skilled and experienced pilots in the Luftwaffe. The Black Widow had proven itself as a war-winning weapon system that provided capabilities no other aircraft could match during night operations. Colonel Kratz compiled the final after-action report for the squadron, documenting the tactical evolution that had transformed American night fighting from a theoretical capability to operational dominance. The report noted that P-61 crews had achieved success rates that validated the aircraft's design while establishing tactics and procedures that would influence night fighter operations for decades. The combination of radar technology, crew training, and aircraft performance had created a system that was greater than the sum of its individual components. Lieutenant Ernst survived the war, though his night fighter career effectively ended after his encounter with the Black Widow in May 1944. He transferred to a day fighter unit and flew defensive missions over Germany until his aircraft was damaged beyond repair during an engagement with American P-51 Mustangs in March 1945. His post-war interviews described the psychological impact of knowing that American night fighters could detect and engage German aircraft without warning, creating constant stress that affected every mission he flew after that first encounter. The technical intelligence, gathered from captured German equipment and interrogated personnel, revealed the extent to which American night fighter capabilities had surprised Luftwaffe leadership. German engineers had not anticipated that American manufacturers could develop radar systems with the sophistication and reliability demonstrated by the SCR-720. The assumption that European technology would remain superior to American developments proved catastrophically wrong, costing Germany its night fighting advantage at a crucial phase of the war. The industrial statistics told the story in stark numerical terms. The United States produced 706 P-61 Black Widow aircraft between May 1944 and September 1945. Germany manufactured approximately 3,000 night fighters during the same period, but the German aircraft were equipped with radar systems that were inferior to American technology by margins that made quantity irrelevant. American industrial capacity had not only matched German production, it had exceeded it while simultaneously delivering superior technology. Captain Axtell returned to the United States in June 1945, his combat tour complete after flying 53 night fighter missions over Europe. His experience with the Black Widow had convinced him that radar-equipped aircraft would define future air combat operations. The ability to detect, track, and engage targets in all weather conditions, and at night provided advantages that would become increasingly important as aircraft speeds increased and combat occurred at longer ranges, where visual identification was impossible. The P-61 continued serving with the United States Army Air Force into the early post-war period, though production ended shortly after VJ Day. The aircraft had proven its value in combat, but advancing technology was already making it obsolete. Jet engines would soon replace piston power plants. Radar systems would become more sophisticated and compact. The fundamental principles that made the Black Widow effective would continue, but the specific aircraft that had established American night fighter dominance would pass into history. The lessons learned from Black Widow operations influenced American military aviation for decades. The importance of crew coordination between pilot and radar operator became fundamental to fighter aircraft design. The integration of radar systems into combat aircraft established requirements that shaped every subsequent generation of fighter development. The recognition that electronic warfare capabilities could provide decisive tactical advantages drove investments in radar, communications, and countermeasures technologies that would characterize Cold War military competition. German survivors of night fighter operations carried memories of the Black Widow as the aircraft that had ended their dominance of night skies over Europe. The psychological impact of being hunted by an invisible opponent affected German tactical thinking and operational planning throughout the final year of the war. The knowledge that American radar technology had surpassed their own developments undermined confidence in German technical superiority that had been a core element of Luftwaffe identity. The historical assessment of the P-61's contribution to Allied victory evolved gradually as military historians gained access to classified operational records and German archives. The aircraft had not achieved the public recognition accorded today fighters like the P-51 Mustang or the P-47 Thunderbolt, but military professionals understood that night fighter operations had provided capabilities that were crucial to Allied strategic success. The ability to protect bomber formations during night operations and to hunt German night fighters in conditions where they had previously operated without challenge represented achievements that affected outcomes across the entire European theatre. The technological legacy of the Black Widow extended far beyond the specific aircraft design. The radar systems, crew coordination procedures, and tactical doctrines developed during P-61 operations became foundational elements of American air power doctrine. Every night, fighter and all-weather interceptor that followed built upon principles established when Northrop engineers designed an aircraft specifically optimized for radar-directed combat in darkness. The Korean War validated the continued relevance of night fighting capabilities when American forces again required aircraft that could operate effectively after sunset. The F-82 Twin Mustang, and later the F-94 Starfire, inherited the operational requirements that the Black Widow had defined. Though technological advances allowed newer aircraft to perform missions with greater effectiveness, the fundamental concept remained unchanged. Radar-equipped aircraft crewed by pilots and operators working in close coordination could dominate night operations against opponents who lacked equivalent capabilities. The Cold War competition between the United States and Soviet Union drove continuous advancement in night fighter and all-weather interceptor technology. American investments in radar systems, electronic warfare capabilities, and crew training reflected lessons learned from Black Widow operations over Europe. The recognition that electronic sensors could provide decisive tactical advantages in conditions where human vision was inadequate shaped military aviation development for the remainder of the 20th century. Captain Eugene Axtell separated from military service in 1946, returning to civilian life with memories of missions that few people outside the night fighter community would understand or appreciate. His 13 confirmed victories represented successful engagements where everything had to work perfectly: radar, engines, weapons, crew coordination, and tactical judgment. A single failure in any system could have meant death in darkness thousands of feet above hostile territory, with no possibility of rescue. The radar operators who had served in Black Widow crews carried their own distinctive memories of the war. Lieutenant Edward Copsall understood that his role had been as critical as the pilots, perhaps more so during the crucial moments when intercept geometry had to be calculated and communicated, while tracking contacts on a phosphor screen in a darkened cockpit. The partnership between pilot and radar operator defined success in ways that solo fighter pilots never experienced. Technical Sergeant James Morrison and the maintenance crews who kept the Black Widows operational deserved recognition that rarely appeared in official histories. The complex radar systems required constant attention from specialists who understood electronics at levels that exceeded most contemporary engineering standards. Vacuum tubes burned out, antenna systems required precise alignment, signal processors drifted out of calibration. The aircraft that performed flawlessly in combat did so because ground crews worked through the night to ensure every system functioned exactly as designed. The industrial achievement, represented by Black Widow production, demonstrated American manufacturing capabilities that Germany could not match. Northrop Corporation designed and built an aircraft that incorporated cutting-edge radar technology, powerful engines, heavy armament, and sophisticated systems integration, while maintaining production schedules that put hundreds of aircraft into operational service within months of initial deployment. The contrast with German production difficulties illustrated the industrial advantages that ultimately determined the war's outcome. The Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum acquired a P-61 Black Widow for its collection in 1948, recognizing the aircraft's historical significance even as jet-powered fighters were making piston engine designs obsolete. The museum's Black Widow had served with the 422nd Night Fighter Squadron, the same unit that Captain Axtell and Lieutenant Copsall had flown with over Europe. The aircraft represented not just a specific technology, but an entire operational concept that had transformed night air combat. The strategic bombing surveys conducted after Germany's surrender revealed the full impact that Allied night fighters had achieved. German industrial production had been disrupted not only by direct bombing damage, but by the defensive measures required to protect facilities from night attack. The reduction in German night fighter effectiveness during the final year of the war had allowed Allied bombers to operate with casualties rates that made sustained operations possible. Without effective night fighter protection, the strategic bombing campaign might have been unsustainable due to losses that exceeded replacement rates. The psychological dimensions of air combat received greater attention from military researchers who studied Black Widow operations. The stress experienced by German crews who knew they could be attacked at any moment by opponents they could not see or anticipate had measurable effects on operational effectiveness. The confidence that had characterized German night fighter operations in 1942 and 1943 had eroded by 1944 as the tactical situation reversed, and German pilots became the hunted rather than the hunters. Oberst Wittgenstein's death in January 1945 symbolized the complete transformation that had occurred in night air operations. The pilot, who had achieved 83 confirmed victories by hunting Allied bombers, had been shot down by an opponent equipped with radar and capabilities that German forces could not counter. The irony was that Wittgenstein had been killed by the same technological advantages that had made him so effective during earlier phases of the war, except now those advantages belonged to Allied forces. The technical comparison between American and German radar systems revealed the extent of Allied superiority in electronic warfare. The SCR-720 operated at frequencies that provided better target resolution than German Lichtenstein systems. American radar had longer detection ranges, more reliable performance, and better resistance to countermeasures. These technical advantages translated directly into tactical superiority that German pilots confronted every time they flew missions where American night fighters were operating. The intelligence assessments that German commanders had relied upon proved disastrously wrong. The assumption that American industrial capacity could not produce sophisticated radar systems in quantity had been contradicted by the hundreds of Black Widows that entered service equipped with electronics that exceeded German capabilities. The belief that American pilots lacked the training and experience necessary for effective night operations had been disproven by squadrons that achieved kill ratios better than most Luftwaffe units. Every assumption that had suggested German night fighter superiority would continue had been invalidated by American technological and operational achievements. Lieutenant Herman Ernst reflected on his experiences in post-war interviews, describing the moment when he first encountered the Black Widow as the point where he understood that Germany would lose the war. The realization that American forces possessed technological capabilities superior to German systems in a domain where the Luftwaffe had maintained decisive advantages meant that no amount of courage or tactical skill could overcome fundamental imbalance in industrial capacity and technical development. The night sky that had been Germany's hunting ground had become a place where German crews were prey for opponents they could neither see nor escape. The doctrine that emerged from Black Widow operations influenced American military aviation for generations. The integration of sophisticated sensors with aircraft performance and heavy armament became the standard approach to fighter design. The emphasis on crew coordination and the recognition that the relationship between pilot and systems operator was as important as individual skill established training requirements that shaped fighter aviation through the jet age and into the era of computerized avionics. The P-61 Black Widow had accomplished exactly what it was designed to achieve. The aircraft had wrestled night air superiority away from German forces who had dominated darkness over Europe for years. American crews flying Black Widows had protected Allied bombing operations, destroyed German night fighters, and established air superiority that extended into every operational condition. Achieved through brute force or overwhelming numbers, but through superior technology, better training, and industrial capacity that could design, build, and deploy advanced weapons systems faster than opponents could counter them. The legacy extended beyond military operations to influence commercial aviation and civilian technology. The radar systems developed for night fighters found applications in weather detection, navigation, and air traffic control. The crew coordination procedures established in Black Widow cockpits informed the development of multi-crew aircraft operations that became standard in commercial aviation. The lessons learned from operating sophisticated electronic systems in demanding environments contributed to broader technological advancement that characterized American aerospace industry development. The veterans who had served in Black Widow squadrons carried distinctive memories of their war service. The combat they had experienced occurred in darkness, where visual references were absent and survival depended on electronic systems and trust in crew members. The missions required sustained concentration and precise coordination in conditions where errors meant death. The psychological demands exceeded those of daylight combat in many respects, creating bonds between crew members that lasted for the rest of their lives. The aircraft itself became an icon of American technological achievement during World War II. The Black Widow represented the successful integration of advanced radar, powerful engines, heavy armament, and sophisticated systems in a purpose-designed platform that outperformed every opponent. The twin-boom configuration created a distinctive silhouette that was instantly recognizable to anyone who had served in the European theater. The matte black paint scheme that gave the aircraft its name also symbolized the invisible threat it represented to enemy forces, who learned too late that American capabilities exceeded every German assessment. The final accounting of Black Widow operations showed 706 aircraft produced, approximately 40,000 combat hours flown, and hundreds of confirmed victories against aircraft and ground targets. The kill ratio exceeded 3-1, meaning American night fighter crews destroyed more than 3 enemy aircraft for every Black Widow lost in combat. These statistics validated the design philosophy and operational concepts that had guided the program from initial development through combat deployment. The question that Luftwaffe commanders had never adequately answered was how American forces had achieved such rapid technological advancement in radar and night fighter capabilities. The answer lay in industrial capacity, engineering expertise, and systematic development programs that could transform theoretical concepts into operational weapons systems within months rather than years. German engineering had produced sophisticated designs, but German industry could not manufacture them in quantities sufficient to maintain technological parity with American production. The night sky over Europe that had been contested so fiercely during 1943 and 1944 fell permanently into Allied control during 1945. German night fighters that had once shot down Allied bombers with devastating effectiveness were reduced to defensive operations, where survival rather than victory became the primary objective. The Black Widow had achieved what RAF night fighters had struggled to accomplish: complete negation of German night fighter capabilities through technological superiority and operational excellence. The historical irony was profound. German pilots, who had mocked the ungainly appearance of the P-61, discovered that the aircraft's aesthetic qualities were irrelevant compared to its operational effectiveness. The twin booms and central nacelle that looked clumsy in photographs translated into excellent stability and weapons platform characteristics during combat. The size that seemed excessive for a fighter aircraft allowed installation of radar systems and fuel capacity that provided capabilities no smaller design could match. Form had followed function, producing an aircraft optimized for its mission regardless of conventional aesthetics. The technical assessment reached Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring's headquarters, with conclusions that contradicted years of German assumptions about American aviation capabilities. The report detailed radar performance specifications that German engineers had believed were theoretically impossible given the size constraints of airborne installations. The Americans had miniaturized complex electronics to fit within an aircraft nose while maintaining detection ranges that exceeded ground-based German systems. This technological achievement indicated a level of industrial sophistication and scientific capability that German leadership had consistently underestimated. Wittgenstein read the intelligence summary with the understanding that his tactics would need fundamental revision. The Luftwaffe could no longer assume technological superiority in night operations. German crews would be fighting against an adversary that possessed better radar, comparable aircraft performance, and crews trained specifically for night interception missions. The strategic advantage that had allowed Germany to inflict devastating losses on Allied bomber formations was evaporating as American night fighters established patrol patterns over critical areas. The autumn of 1944 brought expanded Black Widow operations as additional squadrons deployed to bases throughout France and Belgium. The 425th Night Fighter Squadron arrived at Etaine Airfield in eastern France, operating in coordination with the 422nd Squadron to provide overlapping coverage across the advancing Allied front. American night fighters were now positioned to intercept German aircraft operating over their own territory, reversing the tactical situation that had characterized the air war throughout 1943. Captain Raymond Anderson flew his P-61 from Etaine on the night of October 3rd, patrolling the approaches to Metz, where German forces were attempting to resupply forward units under cover of darkness. His radar operator, Lieutenant Thomas Bradshaw, detected contacts at 12,000 feet, moving northwest toward American positions. Anderson climbed to intercept altitude, while Bradshaw refined the tracking data to confirm the contacts were hostile aircraft rather than friendly transport missions. The engagement developed exactly as training had prepared them. Bradshaw guided Anderson through a pursuit curve that positioned the Black Widow 3,000 feet behind and slightly below the German formation. Anderson identified the aircraft as Junkers Ju-52 transports, lumbering tri-motored. Aircraft that carried supplies and personnel to German units cut off by Allied advances. The transports were escorted by 2 Bf-110 night fighters, but their protective coverage was inadequate against an aircraft they could not detect until visual range. Anderson opened fire on the lead transport from 800 feet, his 20mm cannons tearing through the Ju-52's thin aluminum skin. The transport exploded in a fireball that briefly illuminated the other aircraft in the formation. The German fighters attempted to respond, but Anderson had already positioned for his second attack. The Black Widow's superior speed allowed him to engage the remaining transport before the escorts could maneuver into defensive positions. Both transports destroyed, Anderson turned his attention to the BF-110s. The German pilots recognized they were facing a radar-equipped opponent and immediately initiated evasive maneuvers. But Bradshaw maintained radar contact throughout the engagement, providing Anderson with continuous tracking data. The first BF-110 fell to a sustained burst that destroyed its right engine. The second fighter escaped by diving toward the ground and using terrain features to break radar lock, but the mission was already a complete American victory. The engagement demonstrated how thoroughly the Black Widow had changed night combat dynamics. German aircraft operating in darkness were now vulnerable to American interception regardless of weather conditions or visibility. The Luftwaffe's numerical advantage in night fighters was being negated by superior American technology and training. Each successful Black Widow mission reduced German operational effectiveness, while building American crew confidence and tactical proficiency. German responses to the Black Widow threat included attempts to develop improved radar systems and electronic countermeasures. Luftwaffe engineers worked on Naxos radar detectors that could alert German crews when they were being tracked by Allied radar. These warning systems provided marginal defensive benefits, but could not overcome the fundamental disadvantage of operating against an enemy with superior detection capabilities and comparable aircraft performance. Wittgenstein continued flying night operations through the autumn of 1944 despite the increasing risks. His experience and tactical skill allowed him to survive encounters that destroyed less capable crews, but on the night of January 21, 1945, his Ju-88 was intercepted by an RAF Mosquito night fighter over northern Germany. The loss of Germany's most successful night fighter pilot symbolized the complete reversal of fortunes that had characterized night operations over the previous 18 months. The strategic impact of American night fighters extended beyond individual combat victories. German forces could no longer safely move supplies or personnel at night without risking interception by Black Widows patrolling Allied-controlled airspace. This logistical constraint compounded the broader problems facing German military operations as Allied ground forces advanced across France and into Germany itself. The night sky, which had been a German advantage throughout the early war years, had become a liability that further strained Wehrmacht capabilities. Lieutenant Axtell received promotion to captain in December 1944, recognizing his contributions to the 422nd Squadron's operational success. His total of confirmed kills had reached 23, making him one of the war's most successful night fighter pilots. But Axtell understood that his achievements depended on the radar operators, maintenance crews, and ground controllers who made each mission possible. Night fighting was a team effort where individual heroics mattered less than systematic coordination and technical excellence. The P-61's combat record validated the American approach to night fighter development. Rather than converting existing day fighters for night operations, as many air forces had done, the United States had designed purpose-built aircraft optimized specifically for nocturnal interception missions. The Black Widow's radar integration, crew layout, and performance characteristics reflected lessons learned from British night fighting experience and American engineering capabilities. The result was an aircraft that dominated its operational environment in ways that improvised solutions never could. Colonel Kratz compiled the final operational assessment for the 422nd Night Fighter Squadron in March 1945. The unit had flown over 800 combat sorties since arriving in England, achieving 43 confirmed aerial victories with the loss of only 5 aircraft to enemy action. The kill-to-loss ratio exceeded 10-1, demonstrating tactical superiority that few fighter units achieved in any combat environment. More significantly, The squadron's presence had forced German operational changes that reduced Luftwaffe effectiveness across entire theatre sectors. The Black Widow's success influenced American aircraft development programs beyond the immediate war requirements. The lessons learned from P-61 operations informed jet fighter designs that would dominate the early Cold War period. Radar integration, all-weather capabilities, and crew coordination procedures established during World War II became standard features in aircraft like the F-89 Scorpion and F-94 Starfire. The technological foundation built by Black Widow operations ensured American advantages in night and all-weather interception capabilities for decades. German night fighter operations effectively ceased by April 1945 as fuel shortages and pilot losses made sustained operations impossible. The few remaining Luftwaffe crews flew desperate defensive missions against Allied bomber formations that operated with near impunity over German territory. The radar-directed night fighter force that had inflicted such devastating losses on RAF Bomber Command throughout 1943 had been systematically destroyed by Allied countermeasures, improved tactics, and the introduction of aircraft like the Black Widow that could hunt German hunters in their own element. Lieutenant Herman Ernst survived the war, though he never flew another combat mission after his encounter with the Black Widow over Belgium in May 1944. The damage to his Messerschmitt had been severe enough to require weeks of repair, and by the time the aircraft was operational again, his nerve had been shaken by the experience of being hunted in darkness by an enemy he could not see or escape. Ernst's experience was repeated by hundreds of German night fighter pilots, who discovered that technological advantages could evaporate overnight when facing adversaries with superior equipment and training. The psychological transformation was profound. German crews who had felt like predators became prey. The confidence that came from radar superiority and accumulated victories dissolved when facing American night fighters that possessed better detection systems and equal determination. The darkness that had protected German fighters from Allied bombers became a threat environment where unseen enemies could strike without warning. This psychological burden affected German operational effectiveness as much as the actual combat losses inflicted by Black Widow squadrons. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.